The hold stretches like a cathedral of restraints. Rows of iron cradles extend into amber-lit gloom, each occupied by a hooded figure strapped down with leather and steel. Porcelain bit muzzles, glazed white as bone china, block every mouth. Grey sop, called pale milk, flows through transparent tubes into throats that cannot protest, cannot scream, cannot whisper prayers to forgotten gods. The air tastes of disinfectant and fear sweat, punctuated by the mechanical drip of feeding apparatus. A sister of silence moves between the cradles with measured precision. Her presence transforms the space into something beyond imprisonment. The hooded figures convulse as she passes, bodies arching against restraints in silent agony. Their psychic gifts writhe and die in the null field, radiating from her flesh. She acknowledges no suffering. Her existence serves as both weapon and ward, a living negation that turns thought into absence. This is the daily reality aboard a black ship of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. What we witness represents neither cruelty nor mercy, but function. The vessel operates as an industrial device in the Imperial economy, converting human psychic potential into strategic fuel for humanity's survival across the galaxy's lightless void. Each hooded figure represents calculated risk, a resource to be processed, a component in vast machinery that keeps scattered worlds connected through the Imperium's chaos. The ship's architecture tells its own story. A brass placard near the hold entrance reads Transit Temperance, Transfer, in Gothic script. Posted on grimy bulkheads, psykers quota sheets, detail current manifest, 417 souls collected from 12 worlds over 8 months. The numbers carry no names, only classifications: gamma-level telepaths, beta-grade precognitives, untempered juveniles. Each category corresponds to different fates, though destinations remain deliberately unspecified. A wall chart titled Quiet Sum tracks human inventory with ledger precision. Neat columns record intake dates, processing schedules, transfer quotas, lives reduced to statistics, souls converted to strategic resources. The mathematics are bloodless, clinical. At the corridor's far end, frost gathers around a heavy blast door bearing a brass plate. 9th door, authorized personnel only. The air grows noticeably colder approaching it, as if something beyond draws heat from reality itself. Near administrative sections, Doc Scribe Tal hunches over cogitator terminals, updating manifest records. His uniform bears the administratum's winged skull. His eyes hold the particular exhaustion of a man who has learned to see people as paperwork. He processes transfer orders with detached efficiency, murmuring the crew's standard litany. Throughput preserves worlds. The phrase serves as verbal talisman against moral weight, suggesting larger calculus that justifies systematic spiritual consumption. Among recent acquisitions, one figure draws attention. A small girl sits in Cradle 47 with unusual stillness. Unlike others, she does not struggle or convulse when the silent passes. Tal's records identify her as Mara, collected from an agricultural world after manifesting telekinetic abilities during Harvest Festival. Now she stares at ceiling fixtures with eyes older than her years, as if understanding something adults refuse to acknowledge. The ship's reinforced architecture suggests long-term operations under dangerous conditions. Blast shutters mark regular intervals. A red lever mounted behind protective glass bears stenciled words, Protocol Black Asterion. Its presence implies contingency planning for catastrophic scenarios, situations where human cargo might pose existential threats requiring immediate resolution through methods best left unspecified. This vessel represents more than transportation or imprisonment. It embodies a conversion mechanism, transforming consciousness into navigational infrastructure through systematic processing. The Black Ship operates as both sanctuary and slaughterhouse, protecting the Imperium from psychic contamination while harvesting that contamination for Imperial purposes. This fundamental contradiction lies at the heart of everything we will examine. How does civilization justify consuming its children to fuel expansion? What legal framework permits systematic conversion of human consciousness into strategic resources? The answers lie deeper within restricted sections, behind doors marked with warnings and seals. They rest in documentation that authorizes this harvest, in rituals that sanctify it, and in human cost that makes it possible. As the sister completes her patrol and the hold settles into mechanical feeding rhythms, we prepare to follow the paper trail that transforms children into fuel and calls it salvation. The quiet sum updates its columns, milk drips through tubes, protocol. Black Asterion waits behind glass. Function continues as it must, as it always has, in service to an empire that measures survival in processed souls and navigational light years purchased with human thought. The documentation trail begins with ancient writs sealed in wax and blood. The ninth door's frost spreads along corridor walls, marking boundaries between the permissible and the unthinkable. The frost on the ninth door holds its silence while documentation speaks its ancient authority. In the ship's cramped archive, dock scribe Tal draws a parchment cylinder from its rack, breaking red wax with practiced precision. The seal bears the Aquila pressed deep, surrounded by text in High Gothic, declaring this the Lex Sicana, compiled in the ash years following Horus's betrayal, when wild minds tore reality open and worlds burned from within. The heresy's aftermath left humanity facing extinction through spiritual contamination. Untrained psykers became doorways for entities that devoured worlds not through conquest, but through the simple act of existing in real space. Children's nightmares manifested as demonic incursions. Adolescent telepaths became conduits for warp storms that consumed entire systems. The Emperor's solution, implemented as he took his place upon the Golden Throne, transformed this existential threat into strategic advantage through systematic collection and controlled consumption. From the Lex Sicana flows the Charter of 19 Seals, each seal representing a different facet of psychic management pressed into black wax by the High Lords of Terra. Together, they grant the Adeptus Astra Telepathica unprecedented authority across Imperial space. No planetary governor may refuse the tithe. No Space Marine chapter may interfere with collection. No ecclesiarchy shrine may claim sanctuary rights. The Charter transforms what lesser minds might call abduction into legal taxation, theft into duty, systematic harvest into sacramental necessity. Tal traces quota calculations with his stylus, following numbers that reveal the scale of systematic collection. Standard levy requires 1 psyker per 1,000 souls per decade from each compliant world. Agricultural planets yield their quota during harvest seasons when abilities manifest under stress. Hive worlds concentrate psychic potential in undercity populations, producing higher ratios but requiring more intensive extraction operations. War conditions trigger surge protocols, doubling or tripling quotas to feed increased navigational demands as Imperial fleets move through hostile warp currents. The mathematics carry grim precision. 90% of collected psykers receive designation to the throne, marking them for consumption in rituals that sustain the Astronomican lighthouse. The remaining 10% undergo sanctioning processes, emerging as astropaths, sanctioned psykers, or specialized assets for Imperial institutions. This ratio represents calculated efficiency rather than mercy. The Imperium burns 9 souls to preserve 1, consuming human consciousness as fuel for interstellar navigation and communication. Doctrinal justification frames this consumption through theological necessity. The Lex Sicana declares uncontrolled psykers spiritually compromised and existentially hazardous, to Imperial citizens. Their untrained abilities create vulnerabilities that demons exploit to manifest in real space. Each untrained mind represents a potential warp rift, a breach point through which hostile entities may pour. Collection becomes protective action, removing contamination before it spreads across planetary populations. Controlled psykers, conversely, serve as essential tools for Imperial function. Through sanctification rituals and binding procedures, their abilities channel into navigational infrastructure, communication networks, and military assets. The distance between threat and tool measures precisely in ritual, discipline, and systematic attrition. The Charter acknowledges a rite called soul binding through which the Emperor's light sustains itself, though specifics remain sealed beyond standard clearance levels. Bureaucracy operates as liturgy to distribute moral weight across institutional structures. The massive collection orders that writs be read aloud at planetary musters. The litany against the unseen precedes every seizure. Signatures affix as blessings, countersignatures absolve the signers. Crew repeat their inoculation phrase unconsciously. Throughput preserves worlds. It serves as both prayer and policy, steadying hands that strap struggling bodies while explaining why pale milk flows into mouths already bruised from porcelain muzzles. The legal framework creates perfect circularity. Imperial survival requires psychic infrastructure. Psychic infrastructure demands human fuel. Human fuel collection serves Imperial survival. Each black ship operates within this closed loop, transforming legal authority into spiritual consumption through administrative processes that sanctify systematic harvest. The Charter's 19th seal bears particular significance, authorizing final resolution protocols for containment failure scenarios. The red lever marked Protocol Black Asterion that waits behind protective glass. Tal processes these realities through daily routine, updating manifests while reciting bureaucratic mantras that distance moral weight from operational necessity. His cogitator displays current quotas against Charter requirements, calculating compliance percentages that determine whether the ship continues harvesting or returns to Terra for final disposition. The quiet sum updates its columns with mechanical precision, souls converted to statistics in service of larger calculus. From ancient parchment pressed with imperial seals to daily operations in cramped corridors, the legal foundation transforms horror into procedure. The writ of fire that authorizes black ships burns through 10 millennia of imperial history, consuming generations of psykers to maintain humanity's scattered presence across hostile space. Documentation provides moral insulation through bureaucratic distance, allowing crew to process souls as statistics while serving calculations that measure survival in processed minds and navigational light years purchased with human thought. The question shifts from legal authority to practical implementation. How do these ancient writs manifest when shuttles descend toward planetary surfaces? What mechanisms transform children into cargo, families into statistics, communities into compliance rates? The Charter commands. Now we observe how systematic harvest touches ground and doctrine becomes practice in the hands of clerks who carry copper coils and the silence that kills thought itself. The Charter's ancient authority descends from orbital void to planetary surface through shuttles bearing the telepathica's winged skull. On the hive world of Meridian Tertius, the transit cathedral that once channeled pilgrims toward orbital shrines now processes a different kind of cargo. Stained glass saints observe through lead-traced eyes as Adeptus Arbites establish perimeter cordons between marble columns. Their shock mauls rest against carapace armor with practiced weight. Telepathica clerks arrange portable cogitators beneath frescoes depicting celestial navigation, transforming sacred space into administrative machinery with bureaucratic efficiency. Names disappear first in the systematic harvest. Citizens approach intake stations clutching summons writs that bear the Aquila seal, each document transforming suggestion into legal compulsion. Identity tags punched from leaded parchment replace personal histories with alphanumeric designations: asset gamma 77, juvenile untempered, beta grade, precognitive. The brass stamps bite into wire loops that circle wrists like prayer beads, marking transition from citizen to inventory through administrative ritual that sanctifies collection as taxation. A sister of silence moves through the processing queue with measured precision. Her null aura creates visible disturbance as latent psykers react involuntarily to her presence. A boy convulses and falls to worn marble flooring. His mother reaches instinctively before stopping as an Arbeits enforcer raises his maul. The silent observes the reaction with clinical interest, nodding to a clerk who applies a confirmation tag reading psychically responsive to the child's tunic. Identity becomes classification, name becomes number, child becomes asset, requiring immediate processing. DocScribe Tal operates the central documentation station with 3 other clerks converting bodies into ledger entries. His stylus scratches across data slates while he recites the crew's inoculation phrase unconsciously. Throughput preserves worlds. The mantra provides moral insulation against the mathematics of systematic harvest. Current quota requires 47 confirmed psykers to satisfy charter obligations. His cogitator displays running tallies against Imperial requirements, calculating compliance percentages that determine whether collection continues or concludes. Testing procedures follow established protocol with mechanical precision. Telepathica clerks carry copper coils wound with silver wire, devices detecting psychic resonance through electromagnetic fluctuation. They approach each summoned individual while reciting the canticle of detection, watching for involuntary responses indicating untrained abilities. The test requires no sophisticated equipment, only observation and documentation of reactions to controlled stimuli. Mara stands before the testing station with the peculiar stillness that marked her aboard the black ship. Her mother grips a worn blanket, offering it as trade for her daughter's release. The clerk explains patiently that Imperial law recognizes no negotiation once psychic potential manifests. The copper coil trembles in his hands as he approaches the child. A candle burns at measured distance, flame calibrated by catechism to steady height. When placed in Mara's small palms, the flame leans toward her fingers, curls back, and dies as psychic pressure snuffs the light. The silence proximity confirms the reaction. No one speaks, the clerk notes without drama, juvenile untempered, grade indeterminate, consignment approved. The custody chain operates with industrial efficiency. Confirmed psykers receive restraints appropriate to compliance levels, leather straps for docile subjects, iron manacles for resistors. Sedation follows through pale milk, administered via feeding tubes, the grey ESOP, inducing docility while maintaining biological functions necessary for transport. Oath stamps burn the Aquila into flesh, creating permanent identification that transcends clothing or documentation. Each brand signifies transition from person to property through ritual that transforms theft into taxation. Within the cathedral's shadows, survival economies emerge through whispered exchanges. Extra portions of SOP trade for contraband lullabies recorded on microbeads. Blankets change hands for promises of gentle handling during transport. A grey-haired woman hums a tune to clustered children until a petty officer raises his hand, then pauses. The humming cuts through panic more effectively than shouted litanies. He slides her a chit for additional pale milk under the desk. Contraband lullabies enter the ledger of tolerated crimes because they reduce spillage rates and ease restraint application. The shuttle's cargo hold receives its human freight through hymnal accompaniment. Ecclesiarchy servitors chant the canticle of necessary sacrifice, while processed psykers board transport vehicles. Their voices provide audio cover for sounds of distress, transforming individual suffering into collective prayer through acoustic manipulation. The ritual serves dual function: moral insulation for crew and psychological preparation for cargo who must learn to accept consumption as salvation. Transit to orbit proceeds under mechanical hymns piped through shuttle speakers. The black ship's silhouette consumes the viewport, a knife blade of hull studded with sensor arrays and chapel domes. Docking clamps engage with vibrations that travel through bone. Handover begins immediately as telepathica clerks cross-check ground manifests against ship registers. Tal stands on the threshold between planet and vessel, updating codes to match internal architecture. The custody chain tightens with every sealed door. Purge notices stencil warnings above ventilation grills fitted with chemical injection ports. A maintenance hatch bears the sigil Theta with a downward arrow. The air near it runs colder by degrees, enough to fog breath, despite functional heating systems. A stevedore running cables rubs his forearms and grimaces. "Deck Theta's bleeding through again," he mutters. "They've been charging the wells for field testing. Don't loiter unless you like your thoughts going quiet." Rumors circulate among crew concerning Geller field calibration during warp translation. The ship's navigator reportedly conducts experimental procedures that stress protective barriers separating real space from immaterial chaos. These tests create dangerous conditions requiring emergency protocols that stevedores refuse to discuss in detail. They speak only of sealed compartments, emergency venting systems, and standing orders to avoid certain sections during translation windows. Mara's stretcher passes the Theta hatch without slowing. Frost rims bolt heads. The cold seems to exhale from the deck itself, as if something below draws heat from reality. The corridor turns toward processing holds, where iron cradles wait under amber illumination. The harvest concludes. The ship prepares to receive its tribute. Function continues as it must, converting human potential into imperial infrastructure through systematic application of ancient authority and bureaucratic necessity. The frost-rimmed Theta hatch exhales cold as Mara's stretcher passes into corridors where architecture abandons pretense. The black ship reveals itself as processing facility rather than transport vessel, each bulkhead and chamber calibrated for systematic consumption of human psychic potential through industrial precision. Reinforced adamantine walls bear stenciled protocols and maintenance schedules, while recycled air carries metallic tang and sterile ozone that speaks of constant purification cycles necessary for containing dangerous cargo. Tiered pens occupy the primary holds, rising in galleries that maximize capacity, while maintaining observation lines from central monitoring stations. Iron cradles lock bodies in place across 5 ascending levels, each connected to cogitator banks through fiber optic cables carrying biometric data streams. The design permits single operators to observe hundreds of subjects simultaneously, reducing crew requirements while increasing processing efficiency through architectural optimization. Restraint systems adapt to different classifications: leather straps for docile juveniles, adamantine manacles for adult resistors whose abilities manifest as physical violence against containment protocols. Choir stalls line secondary processing areas in semicircular arrangements facing central podiums where telepathica officers conduct group conditioning sessions. The acoustic engineering amplifies authorized voices while dampening individual responses, creating audio environments that reinforce institutional authority through sound manipulation. Carved aquilus observe from overhead positions, their stone eyes reflecting amber illumination calibrated to specific frequencies. that reportedly induce psychological compliance through neurological pathways responsive to controlled light spectra. Specialized null cells occupy heavily shielded sections lined with obsidian imported from dead worlds where psychic storms once raged before consuming planetary populations. The volcanic glass creates natural barriers against warp intrusion while providing containment for high-risk subjects who demonstrate dangerous abilities during transport phases. Each cell measures precisely 3 meters square, sufficient for biological necessity but inadequate for psychological comfort, creating sensory deprivation environments that accelerate compliance conditioning through isolation stress and thermal absorption that leaves occupants perpetually cold. The Medikey bays reveal clinical approaches to human processing through specialized equipment designed for psychic rather than traditional medical intervention. Trepanation rigs hang from articulated ceiling mounts, their adamantine bits calibrated for precise skull penetration during sanctification procedures that prepare subjects for binding rituals. Surgical tables bear restraint systems rated for subjects experiencing psychic trauma, while preservation apparatus maintains biological functions in individuals whose consciousness undergoes systematic extraction for Imperial service, keeping bodies viable during spiritual consumption processes. Tech priests monitor banks of CSIometers with the attention industrial supervisors apply to pressure gauges and temperature readings throughout manufacturing facilities. The instruments track psychic emanations across ship sections, measuring warp resonance levels through color-coded displays that shift from green through amber to red as readings approach dangerous thresholds. When meters spike toward crimson zones, automated systems prepare emergency protocols that prioritize containment over individual preservation through predetermined response hierarchies that calculate acceptable losses against mission integrity. The ship's chapel occupies a central position accessible from all major corridors, providing spiritual authority for systematic consumption through religious architecture decorated with frescoes depicting humanity's victory over demonic incursion. Crew gather for daily recitation of the Catechism against the Unseen, their voices reinforcing doctrinal justification while providing moral insulation for personnel who process souls as industrial materials. A brass placard hammered into the chapel's rear wall summarizes operational philosophy through 3 words: transit, temperance, transfer. The phrase encapsulates systematic transformation of human consciousness into Imperial infrastructure through bureaucratic procedure. Sisters of Silence maintain quarters that remain perpetually sealed and scentless, their spaces reflecting the null nature of existence that cannot accumulate personal effects or decorative elements. Their presence creates mobile zones of psychic negation during scheduled patrols called quiet walks, systematic sweeps that reset agitation levels in processing holds while providing emergency response capability for containment failures exceeding normal security measures. These operations occur every 4 hours, coordinated with feeding cycles and hymn schedules that govern ship function through predetermined rhythms, optimizing processing efficiency. Operational schedules distribute pale milk at 6-hour intervals, maintaining biological stability while preventing psychological recovery that might complicate compliance protocols. Hymn broadcasts create constant audio environments reinforcing institutional authority through repetition, while waste reclamation operates continuously, removing biological byproducts through automated systems, maintaining sanitary conditions necessary for extended transport operations under hazardous circumstances. Critical systems thread throughout infrastructure, prepared for crisis conditions exceeding normal containment capabilities. Purge jets connect to ventilation networks capable of flooding compartments with chemical agents that neutralize psychic activity through biological termination when standard suppression methods prove inadequate. Quarterly, purity audits represent ultimate accountability mechanisms through robed telepathic auditors whose styluses function as execution instruments, their signatures authorizing personnel termination for procedural violations or spiritual contamination detected during bureaucratic evaluation. The ship's design telegraphs function under crisis conditions through architectural features prioritizing containment over comfort, processing over preservation, institutional survival over individual welfare. Every corridor leads toward predetermined destinations. Every chamber serves systematic consumption. Every system prepares for emergency protocols that sacrifice cargo to preserve mission integrity when psychic outbreaks threaten vessels' survival. How does this industrial machinery manufacture absolute obedience among both cargo and crew through methods that transform resistance into compliance? What precise conditions trigger final solutions represented by purge jets and execution styluses when delicate operational balance faces disruption from sources that standard protocols cannot contain? Obedience aboard the Black Ship is not a matter of persuasion or moral debate. It is an engineered constant, a product of systems designed to maintain the fragile line between order and catastrophic loss. The ship's operational rhythms are set by sedation cycles. Pale milk, viscous and grey, is dispensed through feeding tubes at regular intervals, its chemical content precisely tuned to each detainee's classification. The dosage dulls psychic agitation to a manageable drone, never deep enough for true rest, but sufficient to keep bodies compliant and minds adrift in a fog of half-waking surrender. Between these intervals, the ship's Vox system pipes out sanctioned litanies and catechisms, the catechism against the unseen, canticles of compliance, filling every moment with a sanctioned language that drowns out stray thought. For the prisoners, there is no silence except the silence imposed by null, no gap in which the self might gather strength. If sedation and doctrine falter, escalation is swift and codified. Shock mauls, their charge levels etched into the haft, hang from wall hooks beside pictograms illustrating the ladder of escalation, a tap for minor resistance, an arc for coordinated unrest, full discharge for emergent threats. Every use is logged, time-stamped, and the logs are cross-referenced by the ship's lexarch, an official whose robes are heavy with parchment tabs and oath cords, whose authority is both doctrinal and procedural. The lexarch's role is not to enforce virtue, but to maintain variance. A smooth ledger is a false ledger, he instructs Tal, who learns to adjust reports so that inefficiency is minimized, but not erased. Too much order is suspect, too much mess signals incompetence. This arithmetic extends to the smallest details. Restraints are checked, linens counted. If a detainee resists feeding, the soppy's viscosity is increased. If agitation spreads, the hymn's pitch is lowered, the rhythm modulated for hours if needed. Each minor adjustment is absorbed by a matrix of procedural logic, read by the lexarch like a weather map. The system is designed not for justice, but for equilibrium. Within the pens, a separate economy thrives beneath the surface. Diluted SOP saved from feeds or traded by the more docile is exchanged for a corner of blanket or a momentary loosening of a strap to ease cramps. These trades are enforced by memory and more often scars, a crosshatch from a restraint buckle paid in quiet, a welt from an amber arc owed a favor. Blankets, sop, and even silence become currency. The Sisters of Silence, whose null auras grind psychic thought to dust, are the most costly of all. Being ignored by a sister is a mercy, a reprieve from the agony of psychic suppression. Prisoners learn to present the right kind of stillness, to avoid the eye of the silent, and crew nudge stretchers left or right to spare compliant rouse the full force of null. Placebos too proliferate, the masking litany, stone over water, lock on lock, nail through keyhole, spreads from mouth to mouth. It is a whispered charm with no power over the warp, but crew who know the mathematics of incident logs look the other way, because those who murmur it breathe more steadily, and fewer red discharges mean fewer batteries drained, fewer lines added to the quiet sum. The Lexarch allows it so long as it does not increase variance. In the end, the difference between sanctioned catechism and the masking litany is one of utility, not truth. Protocol. Black Asterion hangs in every major corridor, a red underglass lever tagged with lead and wax. Its activation requires 2 countersigns, a captain or Lexarch, plus the officer commanding the nearest silent cohort, and a spoken clause from the Charter's 19th seal. Its diagram shows which doors will slam and which compartments will vent to void. No one touches it, but its presence is a constant calculation. The ship is a machine for weighing variables, and its answer, 9 times in 10, is subtraction. As the purity audit window approaches, preparations thicken. Brass is polished, blood scrubbed to the edge of stain, choir stalls realigned to schematic precision. Tech priests recalibrate psiometers, sisters pace their quiet walks with the ship's pulse. The quiet sum, the ledger of human throughput, receives an extra column, projected losses, conservative. Hold variance, the Lexarch repeats. In the juvenile gallery, Mara practices the masking litany as the hymn drops in pitch, and a sister passes her by, mercy by omission, another hour bought. The audit shuttle arrives with no fanfare, clamps biting into the hull. Stylus cases click open, and a chime carries through ventilation. Somewhere, a seal is broken, not red under glass, but grey under velvet, soft as dust. Now numbers will be read as sentences, discrepancies will be measured as sins, which will be praised for their efficient cruelty, and whose waste will become a killing ground. And when the hymns cut out for the auditor's silence, will the masking litany hold its thin line against the warp, pressing its ear to the hull? The auditor's presence transforms routine into scrutiny, but the ship's deeper machinery continues its systematic work on minds already softened by isolation and chemical compliance. In specialized indoctrination chambers adjacent to the main holds, the spiritual processing of human consciousness proceeds through graduated modules designed to replace individual identity with institutional reflex. Basic calming mantras flow through personal vox beads, fitted to each cradle, their synthesized voices repeating approved phrases in endless cycles. The Emperor protects through order. Order flows through acceptance. Acceptance brings peace. The words carry no inherent power beyond repetition, but repetition carves channels in consciousness like water wearing stone, creating neural pathways that associate compliance with psychological relief. Sanctioned hand signs follow the mantras in carefully structured lessons, the aquila pressed against chest, fingers forming the sacred triangle, palm to forehead in submission. These gestures serve dual purposes, providing occupational therapy for restrained limbs while creating muscle memory that transforms physical compliance into reflexive response to stress. Junior telepathica clerks demonstrate each sign with patient precision, their movements becoming templates that detainees unconsciously mirror until the gestures feel natural, even necessary. The most insidious element involves advancement tests administered through portable cogitators wheeled between cradles by clerks whose voices carry manufactured warmth. The tests measure nothing meaningful, simple pattern recognition, basic numeracy, memorization of approved prayers, but they promise transfer to specialized facilities with gentler conditions for those who demonstrate exceptional cooperation. The promise is false. No such facilities exist. But the tests achieve their true function. They create hierarchy among the hopeless, encouraging competition for imaginary rewards while fragmenting potential solidarity through manufactured inequality and desperate hope. From Cradle 47, Mara observes these procedures with the peculiar clarity that isolation sometimes brings to young minds. Her small hands, pale from poor circulation and constant restraint, clutch a tin charm smuggled from the Harvest Cathedral, a simple aquila pressed from scrap metal, worthless except as anchor to identity, rapidly dissolving under systematic processing. She watches condensation drip from overhead pipes in steady rhythm, counting drops to maintain temporal awareness as sedation cycles blur the boundaries between sleeping and waking consciousness. The drops become her private clock, marking time in a space designed to eliminate temporal reference. The scheduled quiet walk approaches with mechanical precision. Sister Kithara moves through the galleries like a mobile zone of spiritual negation, her presence transforming the space around her into something beyond mere absence. From the perspective of Gamma 77, a mid-level telepath strapped 3 cradles from Mara, the sister's approach brings contradictory sensations that illuminate the true horror of systematic psychic suppression. Relief floods through him as psychic pressure that has built like steam in sealed pipes suddenly vents through her null aura. The constant background noise of other minds, their fear, pain, desperate prayers, cuts to blessed silence. But relief carries its own agony. The null field doesn't simply suppress psychic ability, it annihilates the psychic identity entirely. For those born with warp-touched minds, losing their abilities resembles losing fundamental senses. Colors drain from perception, emotional resonance flattens to mechanical response, the self contracts to purely biological function, while consciousness observes its own diminishment with clinical detachment. When Sister Kithara passes, the psychic sense returns like blood rushing back into a deadened limb, painful, overwhelming, desperately welcome. The sister's discipline operates with precision rather than cruelty, a distinction that makes their effect more devastating than rage or hatred would be. They understand their impact on psykers and modulate their presence accordingly, spending longer near agitated subjects while passing quickly past those who demonstrate compliance. Their training emphasizes efficiency over brutality, achieving absolute control through systematic application of their null nature. Cruelty implies recognition of the victim's humanity. Clinical efficiency treats consciousness as mere operational parameter requiring adjustment. Crew preparations intensify as the ship approaches scheduled warp translation for Geller field calibration testing. The Lexarch posts warnings throughout common areas in Gothic script that seems to writhe under amber illumination. Personnel advised against cognitive strain during test windows, maintain prescribed meditation schedules, report unusual sensory phenomena immediately. Tech priests conduct final system checks on PSI-ometers while adjusting sensitivity thresholds, their mechadendrites dancing across control surfaces with ritualistic precision. Critical safety protocols receive special attention during pre-test briefings. The PSI-ometers displays show current readings in steady green, but their needles hover near amber as warp proximity affects even heavily sedated psykers. When readings spike past line vermilion, the red threshold indicating psychic emanations approaching dangerous levels, automated systems prepare purge jet activation throughout affected compartments. The chemical sterilization process requires dual key authorization to prevent one key held by the senior tech priest monitoring psychic pressure, another by the silent sister commanding null response teams. Both keys must turn simultaneously within 30 seconds of automated warning, or the system defaults to purge activation, prioritizing containment over preservation through predetermined response hierarchies. The test window approaches with inexorable precision, Mara's tin charm grows cold against her palm as warp energies begin pressing against protective fields. Around her, the masking litany spreads through whispered repetition. Stone over water, lock on lock, nail through keyhole. The words provide psychological comfort while offering no actual protection against forces that treat human consciousness as fuel for manifestation in real space. The psiometers begin their steady climb toward amber as suppressed psychic potential responds to warp proximity like iron filings aligning with magnetic fields. In the monitoring station, two hands hover over authorization keys while the mathematics of acceptable loss hang in recycled air. The storm approaches and suppressed thought prepares to meet psychic chaos in calculations measured by dual keys and the hesitation that might doom them all. The Geller field's calibration begins with cathedral resonance, its protective harmonics rising through hull plating like organ pipes played by inhuman hands. The sound penetrates bone and bulkhead alike, setting condensation trembling on overhead pipes, while tech priest Vox Tertius monitors psiometer arrays with mechadendrite precision. His optical sensors track needle progression through amber zones toward the red threshold, marking boundary between containment and catastrophe. Binary cant whispers through Vox grills, calculating probability matrices for field stability during testing. Procedures that stress protective barriers to operational limits. The field stutters. 3 seconds stretch into subjective hours as protective resonance shifts from steady drone to discordant shriek, its harmonics fragmenting under calibration stress that pushes warp barriers beyond design tolerances. In Cradle 47, Mara's tin charm burns cold against her palm, while psychic pressure builds behind sedated minds like approaching storm. Throughout processing holds, restrained psykers convulse against leather and steel as suppressed abilities respond to proximity, with forces treating human consciousness as doorway rather than barrier. Detainee Gamma 77 experiences Terra transcending individual psychology. His psychic scream translates into electromagnetic surge, sending psiometers shrieking past line vermilion into deep red zones where automated systems prepare emergency protocols. Servo skulls descend from ceiling mounts, mechanical voices reciting litanies against the unseen, while their vox grills split high Gothic syllables like hammer blows against reality under assault. The first warp breach manifests as emotional pressure made tangible rather than visual phenomenon. Grief flows through ventilation systems like atmospheric poison, carrying accumulated sorrow of worlds consumed by war and neglect. The weight transforms abstract concepts into physical force pressing against crew consciousness, while their hands continue operational duties through muscle memory transcending rational thought. On deck Theta, reality bends like heated glass under pressure from something pressing against dimensional barriers, frost spreading from the 9th door in crystalline patterns that hurt to observe directly. Sister Cathera leads her cohort in defensive wedge formation, null auras creating zones of spiritual negation, pushing back against warp intrusion through systematic application of their unnatural nature. Their expressions remain flat, eyes emotionless instruments, but sweat beads on foreheads despite dropping temperatures. One silent stumbles as psychic pressure exceeds null capacity, blood trickling from her nose while maintaining position through discipline, transcending physical limitation. They form living barriers against chaos, their existence serving as anchor points for reality under systematic assault. At the dual-key authorization station, tech priest Vox Tertius turns his bronze key immediately, binary cant flowing through Vox grill prayers while optical sensors track system readings with mechanical precision. Sister Cathera's hand hovers above the second key, frozen in calculation no machine can perform. 2 holds vented now against 4 breached later, juveniles on starboard, distance to the 9th door, cohort positioning. Her null nature grants immunity to warp influence but not moral weight accumulating through systematic application of lethal authority. The hesitation lasts 0.7 seconds while automated systems register delay and prepare default activation sequences prioritizing containment over preservation. Her key turns with mechanical precision. Purge jets engage throughout gamma and delta holds, chemical sterilization, flooding compartments with compounds neutralizing psychic activity through biological termination. The sound resonates through hull plating like thunder, while 2 holds jettison to void through explosive decompression, tearing restraint systems and human bodies into fragments scattered across space. Protocol Black Asterion engages automatically, sealing blast doors and activating emergency containment, transforming affected sections into isolated chambers where death occurs in silence rather than spreading throughout the vessel. In his administrative station, Doc Scribe Tal falsifies manifest numbers under pressure, transcending bureaucratic oversight. His stylus scratches across data slates while recalculating quotas to accommodate losses appearing as acceptable operational variance rather than catastrophic failure. The quiet sum requires immediate adjustment, neat columns accommodating 300 souls reduced to statistical discrepancy through mathematical manipulation, preserving his life via creative accounting. His hands shake while updating records, transforming mass death into ledger entry requiring audit approval. Mara stares at the frosting 9th door as warp energies bleed through reality like infection, spreading through wounded flesh. The brass plate accumulates ice crystals while something beyond presses against barriers containing forces existing outside conventional understanding. Her small fingers clutch the tin charm while whispered, masking litanies provide psychological comfort against phenomena, treating human consciousness as fuel for manifestation in real space. The breach contains itself through systematic application of lethal protocols and human sacrifice measured in hundreds of lives. The navigator's neural pathways sear under psychic feedback, burning synapses while maintaining course corrections necessary for warp translation. Sister Tertia collapses as proximity to unreality exceeds null capacity. Flesh-bearing burns, speaking of contact with forces beyond physical dimension. The Geller field stabilizes, harmonics returning to steady drone while emergency systems reset to standby status. The ship continues function through institutional momentum, transcending individual mourning or moral consideration. Automated systems resume standard operations while cleanup crews process biological debris with mechanical efficiency. Mathematics of acceptable loss enter official records as operational variance, while 300 souls become footnote in reports filed under bureaucratic necessity rather than human tragedy. Function continues as it must, measuring survival in processed minds and navigational capability purchased through systematic consumption of human consciousness. Numbers require immediate reconciliation before purity audit review transforms statistical discrepancy into criminal negligence deserving execution. Behind the 9th door, something stirs in response to warp attention, drawing forces treating reality as suggestion rather than absolute boundary. The frost dissipates from corridor walls as emergency systems reset to standby status, but the ship's deeper machinery continues with bureaucratic momentum that transcends individual catastrophe. Cleanup crews process biological debris with mechanical efficiency, while Purity Auditor Vex Majoris establishes his tribunal in the chapel, transforming sacred space into administrative station where numbers become verdicts and statistical variance determines survival. His robes rustle like dried parchment as servo-scribes arrange portable cogitators beneath frescoes depicting celestial navigation, their mechanical voices preparing data matrices that will measure recent horror against acceptable parameters. The auditor unfurls parchment scrolls bearing the telepathica's winged skull pressed in black wax, each document containing pre-calculated loss matrices and variance tolerances that reduce human catastrophe to administrative procedure. His stylus carries dual authority, recording instrument and execution device capable of inscribing both ledger entries and death sentences through bureaucratic precision that distances moral weight from operational necessity. He studies numbers rather than bodies, calculating variance rather than acknowledging tragedy through institutional logic that transforms systematic killing into strategic mathematics. 300 souls enter official records under classification acceptable operational variance during emergency containment protocols. The phrase performs linguistic alchemy, converting mass death into statistical footnote that preserves institutional function while acknowledging human cost through numerical notation rather than moral consideration. The auditor traces columns with clinical precision, cross-referencing actual losses against predicted casualties during Geller field calibration procedures. His calculations reveal horror economics in mathematical clarity. Immediate jettisoning prevented exponential daemon manifestation that could have consumed the entire vessel, making sacrifice of hundreds preferable to loss of thousands through utilitarian calculus, measuring Imperial survival against individual tragedy. An oath slate records Sister Kithara's 0.7-second hesitation during dual-key authorization, the delay measured by automated systems monitoring response times during crisis conditions. She accepts penance wordlessly, kneeling before the auditor, while he inscribes disciplinary notation onto her service record without acknowledging the human calculation that caused her pause. Extended quiet walk, schedules, and reduced rations constitute correction for moral consideration exceeding operational parameters, physical hardship, acknowledging spiritual failure without questioning institutional logic, requiring such decisions from individuals whose null nature grants immunity to warp influence but not bureaucratic accountability. The Lexarch presents updated quota calculations with parchment sheets detailing shortfalls requiring compensation from subsequent harvests across 3 designated worlds. Charter obligations demand specific numbers regardless of operational losses, creating cascading requirements that transform current catastrophe into future systematic collection through administrative procedure, distributing moral weight across multiple populations. Meridian Quartus, Valdris Prime, and Hestian 7 receive increased levy notices, their citizens designated to compensate for souls lost during emergency protocols through mathematical manipulation that measures compliance in processed minds rather than individual lives. Doc Scribe Tal's falsified SOP volume calculations surfaced during detailed ledger review, his creative accounting discovered through cross-referencing, revealing discrepancies between recorded distribution and actual consumption rates. The auditor studies the numbers with clinical interest, noting mathematical precision suggesting deliberate manipulation rather than clerical error. Reassignment to waste detail constitutes unexpected mercy rather than punishment, removing Tal from direct processing duties while maintaining his utility within ship operations. The decision reflects pragmatic calculation. His skills prove valuable for sanitation systems requiring numerical precision, while waste management positions carry reduced audit scrutiny compared to manifest documentation. The audit exposes systemic contradiction embedded within Imperial doctrine through comparison between official proclamations and operational reality. Sacred texts proclaim soul equality under the Emperor's light, declaring all human consciousness equally valuable in divine calculus transcending mortal understanding. Ledger entries grade utility mathematically, assigning numerical values to individual lives based on psychic potential, processing requirements, and strategic necessity. A gamma-level telepath measures differently from a juvenile untempered in calculations, converting consciousness into navigational infrastructure. The contradiction resolves through bureaucratic compartmentalization, separating spiritual doctrine from operational procedure, allowing crew to serve both simultaneously without acknowledging philosophical impossibility. The quiet sum wall chart receives immediate updates, neat columns accommodating losses through statistical manipulation, preserving overall compliance percentages. Numbers absorb tragedy without protest, converting catastrophe into administrative variance through mathematical precision that distances cause from effect. The ledger becomes altar where human cost transforms into institutional necessity, souls reduced to statistic serving, calculations measuring survival in processed minds, and strategic capability purchased through systematic consumption of human consciousness. Auditor Vex Majoris completes his review with signature authorizing access to previously restricted sections, his stylus inscribing authorization that unseals the 9th door for the first time during our observation. Brass mechanisms disengage with sounds like breaking bones, while locks unbind in stages felt through deck plating. The frost retreats from surfaces no longer containing whatever lies beyond, temperature differentials suggesting processes requiring thermal isolation from standard ship operations. Subhuman chanting echoes from depths below. Voices that might once have been human transform through procedures requiring complete separation from crew consciousness. The sound rises through service shafts and drainage pipes, syllables almost forming words until vowels bend wrong and cadence lengthens beyond normal lungs. The harmonics hurt to hear directly, suggesting humanity processed beyond recognition through rituals demanding such profound isolation that even hardened crew avoid proximity to chambers where 90% of collected souls meet their designated fate. The audit concludes with statistical reconciliation, transforming catastrophe into compliance, mathematical manipulation, preserving institutional function while measuring human cost through numerical notation rather than moral consideration. Function continues as it must, converting tragedy into administrative procedure through bureaucratic necessity that serves calculations measuring imperial survival in processed souls and navigational capability purchased with systematic spiritual consumption. The 9th door stands open, revealing stairs descending toward chambers where consumption mechanisms await examination. What ritual demands such complete isolation, and why do voices echoing from below carry harmonics suggesting consciousness transformed beyond human recognition? The consumption mechanism prepares itself 90% of collected souls destined for processes sustaining imperial navigation through systematic sacrifice measured in light years and human thought converted to strategic infrastructure. The stairs descend through adamantine plating where frost gives way to deeper cold, the kind that emanates from processes requiring thermal isolation from standard ship operations. The 9th door's brass mechanisms continue their grinding retraction while subhuman chanting resolves into rhythmic work songs. Voices that might once have been human transformed through procedures demanding complete separation from crew consciousness. The air thickens with black salt incense and metallic ozone, carrying chemical compounds that mask biological processes occurring in chambers designed for systematic spiritual consumption rather than mere containment. These depths house soul-binding facilities that reveal the black ship's true function through industrial architecture calibrated for processing human consciousness into strategic infrastructure. The chambers occupy cathedral-scale spaces carved from single adamantine blocks, their walls inscribed with runic circuits channeling psychic energy through predetermined pathways leading toward Terra's golden throne. This is the consumption mechanism feeding the Astronomican lighthouse, humanity's psychic beacon, enabling navigation through warp currents that would otherwise scatter Imperial fleets across immaterial chaos. Without constant influx of processed minds, interstellar travel ceases, and the Imperium fragments into isolated systems consumed by darkness. The revelation reframes everything observed aboard this vessel: restraints, sedation schedules, processing quotas, the quiet sums, neat columns tracking human inventory, all serve logistics chains measuring output in navigational light years rather than individual lives. Black ships function as supply convoys in a war economy where human consciousness serves as fuel for empire-spanning hostile galaxy. The safety promised by catechisms represents throughput optimization, bureaucratic language masking industrial procedures that convert children into psychic infrastructure through systematic application of ancient authority. Two processing categories emerge with clinical precision. Sanctioned candidates kneel at binding altars arranged in ordered rows, their psychic potential sufficient for survival during procedures that burn away individual consciousness while preserving essential abilities for Imperial service. The majority march toward choir pits carved into chamber floors, descending spiral staircases toward depths where consumption rituals preserve consciousness just long enough to serve navigational function before burning away entirely. The distinction reflects logistical calculation rather than moral consideration, each category serving predetermined function within systematic conversion of human thought into strategic resources. The binding procedure begins with bell chimes resonating through runic circuits, their harmonics activating psychic conduits carved into chamber walls with mathematical precision. Black salt incense burns in braziers positioned according to geometric patterns, focusing warp energy through controlled channels, the smoke-carrying prayers in high Gothic, while masking compounds that ease biological transition during spiritual consumption. Crown-like frameworks of copper and obsidian descend from ceiling mounts, their contact points calibrated for precise neural interface during procedures that channel the Emperor's will through living circuits. Tech priests monitor psiometers, tracking energy transfer rates, while servo-scribes document each stage through bureaucratic notation, converting tragedy into statistical procedure. The Emperor's will channels through runic pathways with force that sears air itself, psychic pressure building toward crescendo that burns away individual identity while preserving essential consciousness for Imperial service. Candidates convulse as binding energy courses through neural pathways, most perishing during the process as their consciousness feeds the Astronomican's eternal choir. Bodies collapse into ash while spirits join navigational infrastructure, enabling Imperial expansion across hostile space. Survivors emerge half-burned, flesh bearing marks of contact with forces beyond physical dimension. Their eyes disappear entirely, replaced by empty sockets weeping tears of light, while voices reduced to whispers, vocal cords damaged by psychic trauma that transforms human speech into barely audible communication. These broken remnants serve as astropaths and sanctioned psykers, their abilities channeled through Imperial institutions, while humanity burns away through systematic application of spiritual consumption, measured in utility rather than moral consideration. Mara's fate resolves through clinical assessment rather than ceremony. A robed telepathica adept examines her small form with measuring instruments, noting dimensions against predetermined criteria, classifying subjects according to processing requirements. Too small for binding procedures requiring adult neural development, perfect for burning in choir pits, where juvenile consciousness provides optimal fuel for Astronomican maintenance. She disappears into hymnal procession without protest, her tin charm falling to stone flooring, while sedation maintains compliance during final transition from person to fuel, consumed by forces treating human thought as strategic material. From his gallery position, Doc Scribe Tal updates the quiet sum with numbers that acknowledge systematic consumption through statistical notation. Expended to throne, 287. Survivors for sanction, 31. Deferred, 8. The ledger absorbs tragedy without protest, converting catastrophe into administrative variance, while his stylus scratches entries that transform mass death into bureaucratic procedure, serving calculations measuring imperial survival in processed souls and navigational capability purchased through systematic spiritual consumption. The reframe crystallizes with brutal clarity as processing quotas, compliance conditioning, and custody chains reveal their true purpose. Every black ship operates within closed loop, converting legal authority into spiritual consumption, their product measured in light years, safely traversed rather than human cost accumulated through systematic harvest. The Imperium consumes its children to fuel navigation, burning human consciousness to maintain communication networks and warp travel capability, essential for survival against existential threats, requiring constant vigilance and endless fuel. Processing concludes with crew, prayer, acknowledging their role within consumption machinery that transcends individual mortality or moral consideration. May we be expended well. The words carry weight of institutional logic measuring survival through systematic sacrifice, individual lives serving calculations, preserving species, survival against hostile forces, treating real space as invasion target. Function continues as it must, converting human potential into imperial infrastructure through procedures sanctifying necessity rather than virtue. The chambers exhale as binding apparatus resets to standby status, crown frameworks rising, while choir pits hum themselves empty. Survivors receive simple robes, their brand new blindness escorted by hands inured to leading the spiritually damaged toward scholar Sikana assignments that promise gentler facilities through iron chains rather than leather restraints. The promise resolves into continued service measured in processed thoughts and systematic consumption of consciousness transformed into strategic necessity. Those surviving the binding process face existence as spiritually maimed instruments serving imperial institutions, their humanity burned away while abilities remain channeled through bureaucratic necessity. Who monitors these broken remnants during their continued service, and what psychological cost accumulates among crew who process souls as strategic materials while serving calculations measuring survival through systematic consumption of human consciousness converted into navigational infrastructure spanning hostile galaxy? The procession of survivors does not return to light so much as redirect into narrower corridors where trauma transforms into utility through systematic conditioning designed to convert spiritual damage into imperial service. Those who endured soul-binding shuffle under escort toward Shola Sikana intake stations, their empty sockets weeping tears of light, while voices reduced to whispers carry documentation detailing custody transfer from consumption chambers to processing facilities that promise gentler treatment through euphemistic language, masking continued exploitation. Scholar Cicana intake procedures begin with clinical efficiency aboard transport shuttles, fitted with restraint systems calibrated for subjects whose consciousness bears scars from contact with forces beyond physical dimension. Medical servitors shave heads with surgical precision, revealing skull contours that determine hexagrammic tattoo placement according to sacred geometries carved into flesh through ritual scarification. The scars serve dual function: spiritual protection, channeling psychic energy through controlled pathways while providing permanent identification, marking these individuals as processed assets requiring specialized handling throughout their abbreviated service lives. We follow survivor designation Kappa 31, recorded in ledgers as astropath designate 31 Theta, drawn from the 31 noted as survivors for sanction. Before binding, he carried classification Gamma 77, a man who once maintained trade, relationships and neighbors in residential blocks where no one speaks his name now. His sockets weep pale fluid that crusts like salt, while an orderly dabs the discharge with lint-free cloth as if maintaining machinery. He responds to questions in whispers because volume stirs echoes that cause physical pain through damaged neural pathways. Conditioning proceeds through calculated malnutrition, maintaining biological function while preventing psychological recovery that might complicate compliance protocols. Dietary restriction limits intake to nutrient paste, bitter tonics, and ration bars laced with psychic inhibitors that dull warp sensitivity to manageable levels. Sleep undergoes regulation through chemical intervention, creating 4-hour cycles under red illumination with monitored micro-wake periods for prayer recitation and biometric confirmation, preventing deep dream states where traumatized consciousness might manifest dangerous abilities through unconscious psychic activity. Daily existence transforms into labor measured in transmitted messages, divination services, and warp-touched abilities channeled through imperial institutions requiring psychic infrastructure for operational necessity. In choir chambers arranged with geometric precision, 31 Theta sits with 11 others, palms positioned on brass rails conducting telepathic transmission across impossible distances to administratum relays on frontier worlds he will never see. The choir master maintains cadence through metronome clicks like mechanical heartbeat, while measuring focus duration, amplitude output, and residual tremor following each transmission. Training emphasizes function over welfare, preparing subjects for systematic consumption through controlled use rather than immediate burning in choir pits that consumed their companions. Perils of the warp receive recitation as hazard schedule rather than mythological warning. Nausea indicates shutdown protocols, metallic taste plus phantom bell, sounds require emergency null responding, and silent sister intervention. Each psychic act burns away remaining consciousness while serving institutional necessity, individual lifespan measured in messages transmitted rather than years lived. Assignment categories distribute survivors according to psychic classification and institutional requirements across imperial infrastructure. Astropaths merge into communication choirs, linking scattered outposts through telepathic networks spanning hostile space, their collective consciousness maintaining contact between distant worlds while individual identity dissolves through systematic use. Sanctioned psykers receive guard regiment assignment as battlefield assets, channeling warp energy through controlled violence, their abilities providing tactical advantage worth risking catastrophic failure that could consume entire units through uncontrolled manifestation. Select survivors undergo indenture to specialized institutions requiring psychic assets for operational necessity. Navis Nobilite houses bind those whose sight burned toward void currents, housing them in windowless chambers as choir adjuncts and emergency signalers paid nothing that survives their deaths. Administratum offices claim predictive augurs whose consciousness channels precognitive abilities through bureaucratic procedures requiring prophetic insight for resource allocation across multiple sectors. Failed candidates who cannot survive conditioning become components in devices bearing euphemistic designations concealing their human origin. Reactive baffles, choir amplifiers, liminal dampeners, technological terminology masks, processed minds serving as biological components in machinery requiring human consciousness for operation. A lobotomized telepath becomes the heart of stabilizer frameworks, softening psychic backwash for functional choirs. Others reduce to brain suspended in nutrient gel, providing randomization curves, helping fallible humans avoid pattern traps during divination procedures. The components receive blessing through identical litanies as living assets. The difference remains procedural. Devices can be deactivated. Off-ship custody chains operate through contracts binding survivors to Imperial institutions, while tracking brands burned subdermally provide permanent identification, preventing escape or identity change. Oaths sworn under duress create legal framework for continued exploitation, while Auspex scanners maintain constant location monitoring. Service records follow each survivor through institutional assignment, noting abilities, limitations, and estimated operational lifespan, calculated through statistical analysis of previous subjects, processed through similar conditioning protocols. From his waste detail assignment, Doc Scribe Tal observes this pipeline through discarded materials requiring processing and incineration. He carts away gauze stiff with blood from sanction marks, wrappers from inhibitor files, and husks of tin devotional charms like the one Mara lost during final procession. His signatures authorize their destruction while mass calculations enter side ledgers that only auditors review. Passing transit bays, he signs for pallets marked choir augmentation assemblies destined for fortress worlds, their contents humming faintly beneath canvas coverings he does not examine. Institutional logic remains intact throughout processing pipelines converting survivors into instruments serving Imperial necessity through systematic application of trauma transformed into utility. Spiritual cost continues accumulating as consciousness burns away through controlled use, each survivor representing temporary value extracted from systematic harvest before inevitable consumption through psychic exhaustion or catastrophic failure during service assignment. The mathematics never change. Human thought serves as fuel for Imperial infrastructure requiring constant replacement through systematic collection and processing of psychic potential spanning hostile galaxy. The pipeline concludes with deployment to institutions requiring specialized assets, each survivor carrying documentation detailing abilities, limitations, and estimated service duration measured in operational utility rather than individual welfare. Their existence serves calculations measuring survival through processed souls and psychic capability, purchased with human thought converted into strategic necessity. Even compassion, where it manifests, measures as variance control, extra rest reducing error rates, softer voices preventing dangerous surges in psychic pressure. What constitutes existence for those who enforce this systematic consumption, particularly Sisters of Silence, whose presence wounds thought itself while maintaining containment through living negation? Silence maintains operational security through absolute suppression, but what fractures develop within containers whose humanity serves as weapon against consciousness they once shared before null nature transformed them into instruments of spiritual annihilation? The conversion of survivors into instruments leaves one enforcement mechanism unchanged, yet scarred by proximity to systematic consumption: the silent sisterhood. Sister Kithara moves through frost-edged corridors bearing documentation of her 0.7-second hesitation during dual-key authorization, penance manifesting as extended patrol schedules and reduced rations, while her null aura continues serving containment through living negation of human consciousness. Her quarters remain sealed and scentless, reflecting existence that cannot accumulate personal effects because attachment transforms into absence under systematic conditioning that converts natural mutation into precise institutional instrument. The sisterhood emerges from recruitment selecting women born with null mutations, rendering them immune to psychic influence while radiating fields that wound consciousness through proximity to their presence. Training occurs in specialized facilities where natural void becomes controlled weapon through discipline transcending normal human limitation. Vows of silence serve operational necessity rather than religious devotion. their voices carrying null resonance that could damage psychic subjects beyond processing thresholds required for quota compliance. Speech surrenders to hand signals and written documentation, identity replaced by function serving imperial necessity through systematic suppression of thought itself. Daily rituals reflect existence measured in operational efficiency rather than human experience. Weapon maintenance occupies scheduled periods where sisters clean shock mauls and restraint systems with mechanical precision, their movements synchronized like wordless liturgy performed under amber illumination. Documentation proceeds through pictographic notation recording observations without commentary that might introduce variance into procedures requiring absolute consistency. Quiet vigil meditation involves controlled emptiness, consciousness turned inward toward void, defining their nature while providing psychological stability necessary for personnel whose existence wounds humanity they once shared. Deck Theta's perpetual chill finally receives explanation through null wells carved into ship architecture, chambers where sisters conduct extended meditation, accumulating psychic absence for use during warp translation. These reservoirs function like spiritual capacitors, storing concentrated void that supplements Geller field protection through systematic application of living nullity. Tech priests monitor flow through hooded sensors while sisters maintain positions until joints ache and lips blue, their collected emptiness bleeding through ventilation systems, creating frost-edged corridors where breath fogs, despite functional heating overwhelmed by supernatural cold, radiating from concentrated absence. The moral cost manifests through systematic erosion of human experience transformed into institutional utility. Sisters cannot dream because sleep requires consciousness capable of unconscious activity, their rest consisting of meditative emptiness without psychological recovery available to normal humanity. Touch becomes muted sensation, registering pressure without warmth, contact reduced to mechanical necessity, serving operational requirements. Compassion expresses through efficiency rather than emotional connection, care manifesting as precise duty, minimizing suffering through systematic procedures their nature cannot warm with personal comfort. During quiet walk patrols, perspective reveals institutional logic operating through adapted psychology. A trembling hand reaches toward Sister Kithara from processing cradles, seeking human contact, transcending fear of null proximity. She observes without response, neither striking away through cruelty nor grasping through compassion, because her nature transforms both impulses into absence. The hand retreats through biological reflex rather than rejection, her null field creating pain that teaches withdrawal through conditioning, replacing conscious choice with involuntary response. Behind her, psychic pressure floods back like sensation returning to deadened limbs, relief and agony measured in her passing. Surveillance mechanisms restrain even enforcers through institutional procedures, distributing control across multiple authority levels. Lexarch audits include silent sisters through documentation reviewing patrol schedules, response times, and efficiency measurements against predetermined parameters. Dual-key protocols bind them equally to tech priests during emergency authorization, null nature providing no exemption from bureaucratic accountability, requiring multiple signatures for lethal decisions. The control mechanisms form Ouroboros of duty, where enforcers monitor each other through systematic surveillance, creating closed loops, preventing individual moral consideration from disrupting institutional function. This comprehensive monitoring creates foundation for examining resistance through identification of spaces where institutional control faces limitation. Sister Kithara notes sealed doors bearing clearance markings exceeding her authorization, despite null nature suggesting universal access to psychically dangerous areas. Her reports document anomalies through wordless notation indicating concern about sections remaining beyond silent supervision. Within processing holds, whispered conversations continue despite null proximity, crew maintaining communication, suggesting resistance networks operating beneath official surveillance through methods transcending individual mercy or corruption. Where systematic extraction occurs, spiritual leakage follows through psychological pressure, seeking expression despite institutional suppression. Crew develop coping mechanisms approaching heretical territory, private shrines hidden in maintenance spaces, modified prayers acknowledging doubt, whispered conversations in acoustic shadows where broadcast hymns thin and null well proximity creates blind spots in surveillance coverage. Behind sealed doors bearing clearance exceeding silent authorization, activities continue beyond null supervision, representing institutional vulnerabilities where systematic control faces limitation, requiring examination to understand complete ecology of resistance operating within architecture designed for systematic consumption of human consciousness through bureaucratic procedure serving imperial necessity. Behind sealed doors exceeding silent authorization, resistance operates as survival taxation rather than ideological rebellion, extracting psychological relief from systematic oppression through underground economies that price hope against institutional surveillance. The whisper market emerges in acoustic shadows where broadcast hymns, thin and null well proximity, creates blind spots in monitoring coverage, crew trading contraband comfort through networks that acknowledge desperation without challenging fundamental authority structures governing systematic consumption of human consciousness. Rumor networks circulate information through maintenance shifts where personnel exchange intelligence about patrol schedules, audit timing, and silent rotation patterns through gesture and implication rather than explicit communication. A blanket corner becomes currency, a spoonful of undiluted ESOP transforms into loan with interest measured in favors owed during feeding cycles. Crew develop secondary sign language, supplementing official documentation while providing psychological relief through shared acknowledgement of conditions transcending individual endurance. Knowledge becomes commodity measured in operational advantage, advance warning of quiet walks, identification of sympathetic, petty officers, location of acoustic, dead zones where conversation proceeds without vox pickup interference. Contraband circulation focuses on items providing comfort rather than escape, their value measured in psychological relief transcending material utility. Microbeads containing recorded lullabies exchanged for promises of gentler handling during restraint application. Tin devotional charms pass between hands, seeking anchor to identity, dissolving under systematic processing, their religious significance less important than human contact they represent through gifting and receiving. Extra portions of pale milk trade for blankets thin as parchment but warmer than bare metal, each transaction calculated against audit risk while serving psychological necessity that institutional logic permits when variance remains within acceptable parameters. Micro-cult formation develops around detainees promising safe dreams through psychic sharing, desperate crew seeking psychological escape through proximity to abilities they simultaneously suppress. A pale youth whispers promises of shared visions where green worlds exist beyond processing quotas and consumption chambers, his sedated consciousness offering glimpses of meadows half remembered from life before summons writs. The ritual costs sop and cuts, donors bleed lines into rags, the dreamer presses cloth to tongue, and three hearts find the same slow beat while hymns hum in walls. It represents counterfeit sanctuary, unlicensed and dangerous, yet incident logs fall when he works, and the masking litany gains melody through shared hope that serves operational efficiency despite approaching heretical territory. Petty officers participate through calculated, mercy-serving operational efficiency while providing psychological relief for personnel processing souls as industrial materials. extra SOP portions, quiet, screaming that disrupts sleep cycles. Additional blankets reduce medical complications requiring resource expenditure. Gentler voices during restraint application prevent psychic surges that spike psiometers toward dangerous thresholds. One reroutes crates slated for quiet vaults, skimming sufficient quantity to soften galleries before extended silent patrols. Another passes needles through multiple hands to relieve swollen joints without Medicare authorization. Each small mercy measures as variance control rather than compassion, institutional logic permitting kindness when it serves systematic consumption through improved operational parameters. Access to previously sealed quiet vaults arrives through maintenance codes revealing high-risk consignment storage and controlled cold staging areas where most dangerous subjects await processing through specialized procedures requiring isolation from standard operations. Sister Kithara signs release as the Lexarch reads clauses from the Charter's 19th seal, while tech adepts bleed drops onto contact plates. Inside, frost crusts restraint, cradle rims while null well lines pulse faint. Blue along decking, feeding absence into air like coolant. The inventory codes abandon euphemism for clinical honesty. 6 alphas with response amplitude unacceptable. Juveniles designated for pre-null cull prior to field resonance. Purge jets thread corners with shark mouth nozzles, while the ship admits its true function through architectural necessity transcending bureaucratic language. Attempted mutiny exploits maintenance windows when silent patrols concentrate on null well charging and tech priest attention focuses on Geller field calibration rather than crew surveillance. Organizers emerge from waste detail and sanitation crews, whose duties provide access to restricted sections, while their positions carry reduced audit scrutiny compared to manifest documentation. They barter with disgruntled tech adepts for futures that will never materialize, promises of transfer to gentler assignments, access to restricted communications, eventual rotation to positions offering escape through bureaucratic procedure. The plan involves coordinated conduit flush, muting 2 galleries while de-energizing door grids for 19 minutes, moving 15 cradles, and the Meadow dreaming boy toward maintenance airlock, where they will bargain with lives they threaten to vent. The revolt preempts itself through purity audit, cross-referencing, revealing communication patterns and resource discrepancies, indicating organized resistance exceeding acceptable variance parameters. The auditor's stylus compares SOP consumption against HIM modulation, door lubricant requisitions against quiet walk extensions, maintenance cough patterns against gallery stability measurements. Numbers whisper conspiracy more clearly than any confessor through statistical analysis, converting behavioral anomalies into actionable intelligence. When conduit flush begins, silent emergency key activation floods suspected areas with null presence, while automated systems prepare containment protocols, prioritizing institutional survival over individual preservation. Protocol functions as containment net where rebellion drowns without creating ripples, resistance absorbed through systematic suppression that converts organized opposition into statistical variance, requiring administrative notation rather than fundamental policy change. Blast doors fall while purge jets exhale sufficient chemical sting to drop organizers without killing consignments. Null tides roll heavy as sister cohorts take position, their presence crushing contemplation of continued resistance through proximity that wounds thought itself. The Meadow dreaming boy looks at Sister Kithara with hope she cannot accept or crush, his fate sealed through Lexarch's signature, moving him from general population to pre-null cull designation. No alarm sound, no ripples spread. Only recalibration occurs through institutional momentum absorbing disruption like statistical variance. The lesson crystallizes through mathematical precision. Systems don't prevent resistance but price it through surveillance mechanisms, calculating acceptable levels of dissent while maintaining operational efficiency. The Whisper market reappears with adjusted rate cards reflecting increased risk assessment. SOP Spoon costs additional scars and vows to monitor hymn schedules. Tech adepts who sold override strings sign confessions, reading like purchase orders while receiving reassignment to cold conduit inspection until fingers split from thermal exposure. Petty officers retain ranks because they understand gallery management, audit arithmetic, valuing stillness over virtue, through utilitarian calculus measuring compliance against operational necessity. As the ship angles toward Terra, navigation systems calculate approach vectors through warp current stabilized by processed souls consumed during current voyage. Arrival procedures prepare for custody transfer, distributing survivors according to institutional requirements spanning Imperial infrastructure. The Quiet Sum updates columns with final tallies, while crew polish equipment for inspection protocols, determining their continued service aboard vessels, measuring success in souls delivered rather than lives preserved. In waste detail, Dock Scribe Tal lifts sacks of ash labeled "expended to throne" while writing numbers on his hand rather than official documentation. The notation records count of times he observed someone look at the 9th door without breaking, figures serving remembrance rather than falsification through private ledger, acknowledging human cost via memorial notation transcending bureaucratic requirement. He will wash markings before inspection, then write them again afterward, maintaining personal accountability within institutional structure designed to distribute moral weight across multiple authority levels until individual responsibility dissolves into statistical procedure. Terra approaches through void illuminated by Astronomican light, sustained through systematic consumption of consciousness, processed aboard vessels like this one. The Whisper market continues operating through institutional tolerance, resistance priced according to surveillance parameters, while systematic consumption proceeds through bureaucratic necessity, serving Imperial survival measured in processed minds and navigational capability purchased with human thought converted into strategic infrastructure spanning hostile galaxy. What does arrival at Terra resolve through completion of custody chains transforming children into fuel? And what does it calcify permanently within institutional structures requiring constant replacement through systematic harvest? The ledger beginning as wall chart tracking human inventory approaches final entry, measuring voyage success through statistical notation, converting tragedy into administrative procedure, serving calculations that preserve Imperial function through processed souls and psychic capability, purchased with systematic consumption of human consciousness. The void thins as Terra rises through observation ports, its surface obscured by atmospheric haze, while the Astronomican's light pulses with steady rhythm sustained by systematic consumption observed throughout this voyage. Docking clamps engage with mechanical precision, each impact vibrating through hull plating like heartbeat, marking transition from collection to delivery. The ship answers Terra's beacon with authentication codes, while atmosphere equalizes through sealed airlocks, inspection protocols preparing to measure voyage success through statistical reconciliation rather than human consideration. Consignments march toward predetermined fates through corridors lined with servo skulls reciting final litanies, their mechanical voices providing audio cover while custody chains complete systematic transfer from vessel to institutional assignment. The 90% designated to the throne proceed through blast doors toward consumption chambers where their consciousness will feed the Astronomican's eternal flame, mathematical precision converting abstract statistics into physical procession measured in souls delivered rather than lives preserved. Survivors bearing sanctioning scars shuffle under escort toward Schola Psykana facilities, contracts signed like prayers, while bureaucratic ritual sanctifies systematic consumption through administrative procedure, transforming theft into imperial taxation. Comprehensive fallout accumulates across multiple operational levels as systematic consequences distribute through institutional hierarchies, measuring voyage success through compliance percentages and quota fulfillment. 12 worlds surrender their designated psychic contamination through collection procedures, their populations reduced by children whose abilities manifested during harvest festivals and administrative musters, while planetary governors receive proclamations praising compliance with charter obligations. Black ships deplete crew through penance rotations designed to prevent psychological accumulation of moral weight exceeding operational parameters, personnel demonstrating excessive mercy, receiving reassignment to harsher duties, while those showing insufficient compliance face disciplinary action measured in extended service terms. Sister Kithara's 0.7-second hesitation during dual key authorization earns transfer to frontier vessel where null well charging occurs under combat conditions, her efficiency record noting variance requiring correction through increased exposure to systematic consumption serving as behavioral modification. Sisters of Silence surrender names no longer used, their identities dissolving into functional designations, while quarters receive deep sterilization, removing traces of human occupancy before reassignment to replacement personnel. Their existence serves institutional memory through documentation rather than personal continuity, null nature preventing accumulation of experience that might interfere with precise application of spiritual suppression. Loop closure proceeds through systematic completion of processes observed throughout the voyage, each planted element resolving into final statistics, measuring success through bureaucratic notation rather than human consideration. The quiet sum becomes final reporting document, neat columns tracking human inventory through complete processing cycle, from planetary collection to Terra delivery, while mathematical precision converts individual tragedy into administrative variance. Deck Theta's perpetual chill dissipates as null wells drain accumulated emptiness into Terra facilities, frost retreating from corridor walls as concentrated void transfers to institutional reservoirs requiring psychic absence for specialized procedures. The ninth door seals with sounds like breaking bones, brass mechanisms engaging locks that will remain closed until next voyage requires access to consumption chambers feeding Imperial navigation infrastructure. Silence settles over depths where subhuman chanting once echoed from processed minds transformed beyond recognition, their voices joining eternal choir, sustaining warp travel through systematic spiritual consumption measured in light years, safely traversed rather than individual lives expended. Doc Scribe Tal, now gaunt and precise after systematic exposure to processing procedures, files final ledger entries before receiving reassignment to another vessel, continuing systematic harvest across Imperial space. His hands move with mechanical accuracy, while consciousness retains the masking litany as thought habit, despite having nothing requiring concealment, words providing psychological comfort through repetition, serving no protective function beyond mental reflex, developed during extended exposure to systematic consumption. On his palm, in ink that will wash before inspection, then reappear afterward, he writes private numbers serving remembrance rather than falsification, through memorial notation acknowledging human cost via personal accountability, transcending bureaucratic requirement. The camera perspective echoes opening observations with deliberate precision. Processing hold stretches like cathedral of restraints under amber illumination, iron cradles arranged in ordered rows while transparent tubes prepare to feed pale milk into throats that cannot protest. Cradle 47 sits empty, its restraints loosened, faint residue clinging to feeding apparatus where Mara once clutched her tin charm before disappearing into hymnal consumption. New cargo awaits systematic processing through procedures refined across 10 millennia of imperial necessity, their faces bearing expressions of fear and confusion that will dissolve under sedation cycles and compliance conditioning designed to transform resistance into acceptance. Crew gather in chapel for procedural creed recited before undocking, their voices unified through institutional loyalty, transcending individual moral consideration while serving calculations measuring survival through processed souls and navigational capability purchased with human thought converted into strategic infrastructure. The words carry weight of institutional logic, acknowledging systematic consumption through administrative procedure while providing cognitive closure without comfort, moral insulation through bureaucratic distance, allowing personnel to serve calculations requiring constant replacement of human consciousness consumed by forces sustaining imperial expansion. Inventory of souls received, losses accounted, function continues. The black ship undocks from Terra with holds prepared for next harvest, its architecture calibrated for systematic processing of psychic potential through industrial precision, converting human thought into strategic resources serving imperial necessity. The eternal cycle resumes with mechanical inevitability, new quotas distributed across compliant worlds, while fresh summons writs prepare to transform children into cargo through administrative procedure, sanctifying systematic harvest as imperial taxation. Function continues as it must, measuring success through processed minds and navigational light years, purchased with systematic consumption of consciousness, transformed into infrastructure spanning hostile galaxy, where humanity endures through calculated sacrifice of its children to fuel survival against existential threats, requiring endless vigilance and systematic spiritual consumption through bureaucratic necessity rather than virtue.